The autumn wind carried the scent of burning wood, and something that made Martha Whitfield's stomach clench with primal fear as she stepped onto the porch of the one-room schoolhouse. In Cedar Falls, Colorado territory, the 6 orphaned children under her care were finishing their evening lessons inside, their voices reciting multiplication tables, creating a peaceful melody that would soon be shattered forever. What Martha couldn't see in the gathering dusk was the lone figure watching from the ridge above town, a half-blood scout named Samuel Rivers, whose weathered hands gripped his Winchester rifle as he counted the torches moving through the forest below. In 3 hours, the Blackwood gang would ride into Cedar Falls with orders to leave no witnesses, and the only thing standing between those innocent children and a massacre was a man. They had never met a man who carried a secret that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Colorado Territory in the fall of 1876 was a land caught between two worlds, the dying frontier, where lawlessness still ruled vast stretches of wilderness, and the advancing tide of civilization that brought railroads, telegraph lines, and the promise of statehood. Cedar Falls represented everything hopeful about this transformation, a small but thriving community of 43 souls who had carved a life from the unforgiving mountain landscape through sheer determination and mutual support. Martha Whitfield had arrived in Cedar Falls 6 months earlier aboard the narrow-gauge railroad that connected the mining camps to Denver, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel containing her teaching credentials and a heart full of purpose. At 26, she possessed the kind of quiet strength that came from facing adversity with grace. Her parents had died of typhoid when she was 19, leaving her to care for 2 younger siblings until they were old enough to make their own way in the world. Teaching had become her calling, but more than that, it had become her method of healing the wounds left by too much loss too early in life. The Cedar Falls schoolhouse stood at the eastern edge of town, a modest structure of pine logs and hand-hewn timber that served as both educational facility and community meeting hall. Martha had transformed the space into something approaching a proper school, with slate boards mounted on the walls, books donated by families throughout the territory, and wooden desks arranged in neat rows that could accommodate up to 20 children. But her most challenging and rewarding students were the 6 orphans, who lived in the converted attic above the classroom, children whose own stories of loss had brought them under her protective wing. There was 12-year-old Rebecca Thompson, whose parents had died in a mine collapse the previous winter, leaving her to care for her younger siblings until Martha arrived. Rebecca had assumed adult responsibilities with the stoic determination of someone forced to grow up too quickly, but Martha could still see glimpses of the child she should have been allowed to remain. 8-year-old twins Daniel and David Mason had watched their father gunned down during a bank robbery in nearby Silverton, their mother dying of grief just 3 months later. The boys had developed an almost telepathic connection, communicating through glances and gestures that spoke to their shared trauma and mutual dependence. 10-year-old Sarah Chen was the daughter of Chinese immigrants who had worked on the railroad construction crews before establishing a small general store in Cedar Falls. Her parents had died during the influenza outbreak that swept through the mountain communities the previous spring, leaving Sarah as the only Chinese child in a predominantly white community. She faced the additional challenge of navigating cultural differences while dealing with her grief, but her quick intelligence and gentle nature had won over even the most prejudiced residents. 9-year-old Michael O'Connor had arrived in Cedar Falls after walking nearly 200 miles from Kansas, where his Irish immigrant parents had been killed during a tornado that destroyed their homestead. He carried with him a fierce independence and a distrust of adults that Martha was slowly working to overcome through patience and consistent kindness. The youngest was 6-year-old Emma Patterson, whose parents had been killed by a grizzly bear while checking their trap lines in the high country. Emma rarely spoke above a whisper and startled at sudden noises, but she showed remarkable artistic talent that Martha encouraged through drawing and painting exercises. These 6 children had become Martha's family in every way that mattered, and she had gradually transformed the schoolhouse into a home where they could heal from their respective traumas while receiving the education that would prepare them for productive lives as adults. The community had embraced this arrangement, with local families contributing food, clothing, and supplies to support Martha's informal orphanage. Doc Peterson made regular visits to ensure the children's health, while merchant families like the Andersons and the Coopers provided employment opportunities for the older children to earn small amounts of money while learning practical skills. But the peaceful existence they had built in Cedar Falls was about to be shattered by forces that none of them could have anticipated. 20 miles to the west, in the abandoned mining camp of Devil's Canyon, 37 members of the Blackwood gang were preparing for what their leader promised would be their most profitable raid yet. The gang had been operating throughout the Colorado Territory for 3 years, robbing banks, stagecoaches, and supply trains while avoiding capture through a combination of superior firepower, detailed intelligence gathering, and absolute ruthlessness in eliminating witnesses. Ezra Blackwood had built his criminal empire on the principle that fear was more valuable than gold. Dead witnesses couldn't identify gang members to territorial marshals, and communities that knew the Blackwood gang's reputation for violence were more likely to cooperate during robberies rather than risk retaliation. The gang's success had attracted desperados from across the Western Territories, men with prices on their heads, who saw Blackwood's organization as their best opportunity for profitable criminal activity. The planned attack on Cedar Falls had been months in the planning, based on intelligence that the town's bank contained gold deposits from several successful mining operations in the surrounding mountains. More importantly, Cedar Falls represented exactly the kind of target that Blackwood preferred: isolated, lightly defended, and small enough that the entire population could be controlled through overwhelming force. The gang scout, a half-breed tracker known as Crow Feather, had spent weeks observing the town's routines and defenses, reporting back that Cedar Falls would be easy prey for a well-coordinated assault. What Crow Feather hadn't reported was that his observations had been observed in return by someone who possessed even superior tracking skills and a far more personal interest in the town's welfare. Samuel Rivers had been watching the Blackwood gang's preparations for the past month, using skills learned during his years as an Army scout to gather intelligence about their planned attack. At 38, Samuel carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had survived situations that would have broken lesser individuals. But his weathered exterior concealed a complex history of divided loyalties and painful choices. Samuel's mother had been a Cheyenne woman named Morning Star who had married his father, an Irish immigrant named Patrick Rivers, during the brief period of relative peace that followed the Treaty of Fort Laramie. In 1851, their mixed-race marriage had been controversial in both communities, but their love had been strong enough to overcome the prejudice they faced from whites, who viewed Patrick as a traitor to his race, and Indians, who saw Morning Star as naive about white intentions. Samuel had grown up walking between two worlds, learning the tracking and survival skills of his mother's people while also mastering the reading, writing, and tactical knowledge that his father insisted would be necessary for success in the white man's world. This dual education had made him valuable as an Army scout during the Indian Wars of the 1860s and early 1870s, but it had also left him spiritually homeless, too white for full acceptance among the Cheyenne, too Indian for complete trust among the settlers. His military service had ended abruptly in 1874 following an incident at Sand Creek that had shattered his faith in the Army's mission and his own role in the ongoing conflict between his mother's people and his father's adopted country. Samuel had witnessed atrocities committed by both sides during his years as a scout, but the massacre of peaceful Cheyenne families by soldiers he had guided to their camp had finally broken something essential inside him. He had walked away from his commission and disappeared into the wilderness, living as a hermit and occasional guide while trying to find some way to atone for his participation in the destruction of his mother's world. The discovery that the Blackwood gang was planning to attack Cedar Falls had given Samuel the first clear moral choice he had faced since leaving the Army. Whatever his complicated feelings about white settlement of Indian lands, the people of Cedar Falls were innocent civilians who deserved protection from criminal violence. More importantly, Samuel had learned through careful observation that the town's schoolhouse served as home to 6 orphan children, whose circumstances reminded him painfully of his own childhood experiences of loss and displacement. Samuel had spent the past week conducting reconnaissance of Cedar Falls, learning the routines of its residents and identifying the best defensive positions. In case of attack, his observations had revealed that the town possessed virtually no organized defenses, no sheriff, no militia, and only a handful of men with military experience who might be capable of organized resistance. The townspeople were hardworking, decent folk who had built their community through cooperation and mutual support, but they were completely unprepared for the kind of coordinated assault that the Blackwood gang specialized in delivering. Most troubling to Samuel was his growing awareness that the schoolhouse and its occupants would likely be targeted specifically during any attack on the town. Blackwood's reputation for eliminating witnesses meant that Martha and the children would not be allowed to survive the gang's raid, regardless of whether they posed any actual threat to the criminals' escape. The thought of those innocent children facing the same kind of violence that had shaped his own traumatic childhood was something that Samuel could not accept, even if intervention meant revealing his presence and abandoning the anonymous existence he had maintained since leaving the army. As evening settled over the Colorado mountains on what would prove to be the last peaceful night in Cedar Falls history, Samuel Rivers made his final preparations for a confrontation that would test everything he had learned about survival, combat, and the price of standing up to evil men who preyed on the innocent. His decision to intervene would set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the lives of everyone involved, revealing secrets that had been buried for years and forging connections that none of them could have anticipated. The wind continued to carry the scent of approaching danger as Martha finished helping the children with their evening lessons, completely unaware that their guardian angel was already moving into position on the ridge above town, his rifle loaded and his resolve hardened by the knowledge that some fights were worth everything you had to give. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Blackwood gang's camp at Devil's Canyon resembled a military operation, more than a typical outlaw hideout. Ezra Blackwood had learned the value of discipline and organization during his 3 years as a Confederate cavalry officer. Before, desertion and a string of wartime atrocities had put a price on his head that made returning to civilian life impossible. Now, at 34, he commanded his gang with the same iron-fisted authority he had once used to lead soldiers, understanding that successful criminal enterprises required planning, coordination, and absolute obedience to command structure. The gang's temporary camp was strategically positioned in a box canyon that provided natural protection from surprise attacks while offering multiple escape routes through mountain passes that only experienced riders could navigate. Blackwood had divided his 37 men into specialized units based on their individual skills, and experienced raiders who would conduct the actual robbery, sharpshooters who would provide covering fire and eliminate resistance, and scouts responsible for intelligence gathering and perimeter security. Crow Feather sat beside the central campfire, studying hand-drawn maps of Cedar Falls while reporting his final intelligence assessment to Blackwood and the gang's other leaders. The half-breed tracker was a man caught between worlds, much like Samuel Rivers, but where Samuel had chosen isolation to deal with his divided loyalties, Crow Feather had embraced the outlaw life as a form of rebellion against both the white society that rejected his Indian heritage and the tribal communities that viewed his cooperation with criminals as betrayal. Banks got maybe 8,000 in gold coin, plus whatever's in the safe deposit boxes, Crow Feather reported, his finger tracing the main street layout on the crude map. Sheriff died of pneumonia last month, no replacement yet. Town council's been arguing about hiring a marshal, but they're too cheap to pay decent wages. Blackwood studied the map with the calculating gaze of a professional soldier assessing terrain. For tactical advantage, Cedar Falls' isolated location made it perfect for their purposes. No telegraph lines to summon help, no railroad depot that might bring unexpected visitors, and the nearest territorial marshal stationed more than 60 miles away in Denver. Even if someone escaped to raise an alarm, the gang would have hours to complete their business and disappear into the wilderness. "What about resistance?" asked Jake Morrison, Blackwood's second in command and the closest thing to a friend that the gang leader allowed himself. Morrison was a former Union Army sergeant who had turned to crime after the war ended and left him unemployed with no marketable skills beyond violence. His battlefield experience made him valuable in planning raids that required military-style coordination. "Maybe 6 or 7 men with any real fighting experience," Crowfeather continued. "Most of them are miners and shopkeepers who wouldn't know one end of a rifle from the other. Doc Peterson served as a field surgeon during the war, but he's pushing 70 and half blind. The blacksmith, Tom Anderson, might give us trouble. He's got the build for it and keeps a shotgun behind his counter." Blackwood nodded thoughtfully, his scarred hands folding the map with practiced precision. "Standard protocol. Hit fast, hit hard, eliminate any resistance before it can organize." "Morrison, you take 12 men and secure the bank. Carter, your sharpshooters cover the main approaches. I'll lead the sweep team through the residential area to round up civilians." What none of them knew was that their every word was being overheard by Samuel Rivers, who had spent the previous night carefully positioning himself within listening distance of their camp. Samuel's Cheyenne training had taught him to move through hostile territory without detection, skills that had been refined during his years as an Army scout, conducting reconnaissance behind enemy lines. Now those same abilities allowed him to gather intelligence that would be crucial for organizing any effective defense of Cedar Falls. Samuel learned that the attack was scheduled for dawn, when most of the town's residents would still be in their homes and unable to organize coordinated resistance. The gang planned to divide into 3 groups, one to rob the bank, another to control the civilian population, and a third to eliminate specific targets that might pose threats to their operation. Most chilling was Blackwood's casual order to clean up loose ends, military terminology that Samuel recognized as a euphemism for murdering witnesses. The half-blood scout retreated from his observation position as the first rays of dawn began, illuminating the eastern peaks, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned that survival often depended on remaining invisible to hostile forces. He had perhaps for hours to reach Cedar Falls and organize whatever defense was possible. With the limited resources available, the townspeople deserved warning about what was coming. But Samuel also knew that panic could be more dangerous than ignorance if it led to poorly planned resistance that would only increase casualties. Samuel's knowledge of military tactics told him that Cedar Falls' scattered layout made traditional defensive positions almost impossible to establish. The town stretched along both sides of Cedar Creek for nearly half a mile, with individual buildings separated by gardens, corrals, and open spaces that would allow attackers to approach undercover, while preventing defenders from supporting each other effectively. The schoolhouse stood at the most vulnerable position, isolated at the eastern edge of town where it could be easily surrounded and cut off from any potential help. His decision was made with the cold calculation of a professional soldier assessing an impossible situation, rather than attempting to organize a general defense that would likely fail and result in maximum casualties. Samuel would focus his efforts on protecting the most vulnerable targets, Martha and the 6 children who represented everything innocent and worth preserving in the community. If he could keep them safe while the gang conducted their robbery and departed, he might be able to minimize the overall bloodshed while fulfilling his moral obligation to protect the defenseless. Samuel reached the ridge overlooking Cedar Falls just as the town was beginning to stir with the morning activities. That marked the start of another peaceful day. Smoke rose from chimneys as families prepared breakfast. Children's voices could be heard from the schoolhouse where Martha was leading morning exercises, and the normal sounds of a thriving community provided a stark contrast to the violence that would soon shatter their tranquil existence. The half-blood scout selected a defensive position that provided clear sight lines, across the eastern approaches while offering cover behind a jumble of granite boulders that would stop rifle fire. His Winchester held 15 rounds, and he carried additional ammunition that would allow him to maintain sustained fire for perhaps 20 minutes if the gang's assault developed as he expected. More importantly, his elevated position would allow him to provide covering fire for anyone attempting to reach the schoolhouse or escape toward the western hills where the terrain favored defenders over pursuers. Martha was helping Rebecca sweep the schoolhouse floors when Samuel's distinctive whistle cut through the morning air, 3 sharp notes followed by 2 longer ones, a signal used by frontier scouts to warn of approaching danger. Martha paused in her work, recognizing the urgency in the sound even though she had never heard it before. Something in the pattern triggered an instinctive response that sent shivers down her spine and made her automatically look toward the ridge where the sound had originated. Through the schoolhouse windows, Martha caught a glimpse of movement among the rocks above town, a flash of buckskin clothing, and the glint of sunlight on metal that suggested someone was watching Cedar Falls. From concealment, her teaching experience had developed her ability to notice details that others might miss, and something about the watcher's position and the timing of his whistle suggested that he was trying to communicate a warning rather than pose a threat. "Children, gather your things quickly," Martha announced, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from managing classrooms full of energetic young minds. "We're going to practice our emergency procedures this morning." The emergency procedures were something Martha had developed during her first month in Cedar Falls, based on her reading about Indian raids and outlaw attacks that had plagued other frontier communities. She had drilled the children on quickly gathering essential supplies and moving to a secure location if danger threatened. Though none of them had ever expected to use the training in a real emergency, Rebecca immediately recognized the seriousness in Martha's tone and began helping the younger children collect their coats and personal belongings without asking questions that might increase their anxiety. The twins Daniel and David moved with the synchronized efficiency that characterized their partnership, each knowing instinctively what the other would do and adapting their actions accordingly. Sarah Chen gathered her precious books and writing materials, while Michael O'Connor hefted the small axe that he used for splitting kindling, his survival instincts telling him that tools might become weapons if the situation deteriorated. Young Emma Patterson clung to her rag doll while staying close to Martha, her wide eyes reflecting the fear that she couldn't quite articulate, but definitely felt in the tension that had suddenly filled the schoolhouse. Martha knelt beside her youngest charge and spoke in the gentle tone that had gradually won Emma's trust over the past months. "We're just being extra careful, sweetheart," Martha explained, smoothing Emma's blonde hair with maternal tenderness. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make sure children are safe, just like how we practice fire drills, to stay prepared." The comparison to fire drills helped the children understand what was expected without creating panic, and within minutes, Martha had organized them into a cohesive group ready to move if necessary. She gathered the emergency supplies she had stored in a wooden crate near the dorm: medical supplies, food rations, blankets, and the loaded Derringer that Doc Peterson had insisted she keep for protection. Despite her Quaker upbringing's emphasis on nonviolence, Samuel watched the schoolhouse preparations through his rifle scope, impressed by Martha's quick recognition of danger and efficient organization of the children. Her response suggested someone with practical intelligence and the kind of calm competence that would be essential for survival if his defensive efforts failed to protect them completely. He could see her moving among the children with purposeful authority, preparing them for whatever might come while maintaining the composed demeanor that would prevent panic. The sound of approaching horses echoed from the western canyon, still distant but growing steadily closer as the Blackwood gang began their final approach to Cedar Falls. Samuel estimated perhaps 15 minutes before the first raiders would reach the town's outskirts, giving him just enough time for one crucial intervention that might save innocent lives. He shouldered his rifle and began moving down the ridge toward the schoolhouse, knowing that the next few hours would test everything he had learned about combat, survival, and the price of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Samuel Rivers moved down the rocky slope with the fluid silence of a predator, his moccasined feet finding purchase on loose stone without disturbing so much as a pebble. Years of hunting with his Cheyenne uncles had taught him that the difference between life and death often came down to a single careless footstep, a lesson reinforced during countless military patrols where enemy scouts listened for any sound that might betray an approaching force. Now those same skills carried him toward the schoolhouse, where Martha Whitfield was preparing 6 innocent children for a horror they could not yet comprehend. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Falls as Samuel approached the schoolhouse from the north, using the building itself as cover while he observed the surrounding terrain for signs of the gang's advanced scouts. Crow Feather was competent but predictable in his methods, preferring high-ground observation posts that provided good visibility at the cost of mobility. Samuel's superior training told him that the half-breed tracker would position himself on the southern ridge to coordinate the gang's approach, leaving the northern approaches temporarily unobserved. Martha was organizing the children near the schoolhouse door when a soft tap on the window made her turn toward the sound. Through the glass, she saw a man's weathered face framed by long black hair and features that spoke of mixed heritage Native American cheekbones combined with European eyes that held depths of experience she could only imagine. His clothing was practical frontier gear, buckskin shirt, wool trousers, and worn boots that suggested someone who lived his life outdoors. Most importantly, his hands were clearly visible and empty of weapons, a deliberate gesture of peaceful intent. "Ma'am," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying just enough volume to be heard through the window while remaining inaudible to anyone more than a few feet away. "My name is Samuel Rivers. You and the children are in immediate danger, and I'm here to help you reach safety." Martha's first instinct was protective suspicion. Frontier communities had learned to be wary of strangers who appeared without warning, especially when they brought claims of impending danger. But something in Samuel's bearing reminded her of her father, who had served as a cavalry officer during the Mexican War. There was a quality of contained competence about this man, a professional calm that suggested he was accustomed to dangerous situations and knew how to handle them effectively. "What kind of danger?" Martha asked, moving closer to the window while motioning for the children to stay back. Her hand rested near the derringer in her apron pocket, though she hoped desperately that she would not need to use it. "The Blackwood gang is approaching from the west," Samuel replied, his eyes continuously scanning the surrounding area. Even as he spoke, 37 armed men planning to rob the bank and eliminate witnesses. "They'll be here within 10 minutes, and this schoolhouse will be one of their primary targets." The name Blackwood sent a chill through Martha that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. Every frontier community had heard stories about Ezra Blackwood's gang and their reputation for leaving no survivors to identify them to territorial authorities. The tales were often dismissed as exaggerated frontier legends, but Martha's rational mind told her that such widespread fear had to be based on some foundation of truth. "Who are you?" Martha demanded, her school teacher's instincts requiring additional verification before she would trust the safety of her children to a complete stranger. "How do I know you're not one of them?" Samuel understood her caution and respected it. A woman who would blindly trust a stranger's word about danger would not be capable of protecting 6 orphan children. In the harsh realities of frontier life, he slowly removed a worn leather wallet from his shirt pocket and held it where Martha could see the contents through the window glass. "I'm a former Army scout, discharged from the 5th Cavalry in 1874, Samuel explained, displaying his military identification papers along with several letters of commendation, signed by officers whose names Martha recognized from newspaper accounts of Indian war campaigns. "I've been tracking this gang for weeks, waiting for an opportunity to stop them before they could hurt more innocent people." The documentation appeared genuine to Martha's educated eye, and more importantly, the man's manner suggested someone accustomed to command responsibility rather than criminal deception. But what convinced her completely was the way his eyes kept returning to the children behind her, not with the calculating assessment of a predator, but with the protective concern of someone who genuinely cared about their welfare. "What do you want us to do?" Martha asked, her decision made with the practical wisdom of someone who understood that survival sometimes required trusting imperfect options over certain disaster. "There's a cave system in the hills about half a mile north of here," Samuel replied, pointing toward a dense stand of pine trees that concealed the rocky outcroppings beyond. "Natural fortification with multiple exits and water source. I can get you there safely, but we need to move immediately." Martha nodded and turned to address the children with the same calm authority she used during their emergency drills. "Children, we're going on an unexpected adventure this morning. Mr. Rivers is going to guide us to a special place where we can be safe while some dangerous men pass through our town." Rebecca Thompson immediately grasped the seriousness of the situation, her experiences as the eldest orphan having taught her to recognize adult conversations that carried life and death implications. She began helping the younger children gather their emergency supplies, while asking practical questions that demonstrated remarkable maturity for a 12-year-old. "How long will we need to stay hidden?" Rebecca asked, slipping her arms through the straps of a canvas pack that contained first aid supplies and emergency food. "Several hours at minimum," Samuel answered honestly, recognizing that she was mature enough to handle truthful information. "The gang will conduct their business and move on, but we can't risk returning until I'm certain they've left the area completely." The twins Daniel and David exchanged one of their wordless communications. Before Daniel spoke for both of them, "Are you going to fight them, Mr. Rivers?" The question carried the weight of children who had witnessed their fathers' violent death and understood that some situations could only be resolved through force. "I'm going to do whatever is necessary to keep you safe," Samuel replied, his tone carrying the kind of quiet conviction that made promises believable. "But my first priority is getting you away from here before the fighting starts." Sarah Chen carefully wrapped her precious school books in an oilcloth before placing them in her pack, her actions reflecting the immigrant family's emphasis on education as the pathway to success in America. "Will our school be safe?" she asked, her accented English revealing the careful pronunciation of someone still mastering her second language. "Buildings can be rebuilt," Martha answered gently, placing a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "What matters most is keeping all of you alive and unharmed. Everything else is just wood and stone." Michael O'Connor hefted his small axe and looked directly at Samuel, with the suspicious assessment of someone who had learned not to trust adult promises. "You swear you're not going to abandon us out there?" he asked, his Irish accent still noticeable despite months of living in the predominantly English-speaking community. Samuel knelt down to Michael's eye level, understanding that the boy's distrust came from painful experience rather than natural hostility. "I give you my word as a soldier and a man," he said solemnly. "I will not abandon you or let anyone harm you while I'm alive to prevent it." Something in Samuel's tone convinced Michael that this promise was different from the empty reassurances that adults often gave children. The boy nodded curtly and positioned himself near the door, ready to follow orders from someone he was beginning to trust. Little Emma Patterson clutched her rag doll while staying close to Martha, her wide eyes reflecting fear, but also the beginning of curiosity about their unexpected protector. "Are you an Indian, Mr. Rivers?" she asked with the innocent directness that only children could manage. "My mother was Cheyenne. My father was Irish," Samuel replied without defensiveness, long accustomed to questions about his mixed heritage. "That makes me both and neither, depending on who's asking." Martha appreciated his honest response to Emma's question, recognizing the complexity of identity that mixed-race individuals faced in a society that often demanded people choose sides in conflicts they had not created. His willingness to acknowledge his dual heritage rather than hiding it suggested integrity that reinforced her growing trust in his character. The sound of distant gunfire echoed from the western edge of town, followed by shouts and the thunder of horses' hooves on the main street. The Blackwood gang had arrived ahead of Samuel's estimated timeline, probably because Crow Feather had spotted some sign of Samuel's earlier reconnaissance and advised accelerating their attack schedule. "Time to go," Samuel announced, his military training taking over as the tactical situation shifted from preparation to execution. Stay close, stay quiet, and do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it." Martha gathered the children around her like a protective shield, while Samuel checked the schoolhouse windows to assess the gang's initial deployment. Through the southern window, he could see riders spreading out along the main street while others dismounted to begin their assault on the bank. More concerning were the 3 horsemen who had separated from the main group and were riding directly toward the schoolhouse, their weapons drawn and their intent unmistakably hostile. "Back door," Samuel ordered curtly. Immediately, the group moved through the schoolhouse with practiced efficiency, Martha keeping the children together while Samuel provided security at the rear. They emerged from the building just as the first gang members rounded the eastern corner, their horses' hooves drumming against the hard-packed earth. As they approached the now empty schoolhouse, Samuel led them into the pine forest using game trails that would conceal their movement while providing the fastest route toward the cave system that would serve as their sanctuary. Behind them, Cedar Falls erupted into chaos as the Blackwood gang began their systematic assault on a community that had never imagined it would face such organized violence. The real battle was just beginning, and Samuel Rivers found himself responsible for protecting 7 lives while facing an enemy that had never shown mercy to anyone who stood in their way. The cave entrance was barely visible among the twisted roots of an ancient pine tree, concealed so well that Samuel had only discovered it during his systematic reconnaissance of the surrounding terrain 3 days earlier. Now, as he led Martha and the 6 children through the narrow opening, he was grateful for his methodical approach to preparation. The natural fortress would provide exactly the kind of protection they needed while the Blackwood gang conducted their brutal business in Cedar Falls below. The cave system extended deep into the mountainside, carved by underground streams over countless centuries into a network of chambers, connected by passages that ranged from cathedral-like spaces to narrow crawlways barely wide enough for a single person. Samuel had explored enough of the system to know it offered multiple escape routes if they were discovered, along with a natural spring that provided fresh water and storage areas where emergency supplies could be cached safely. Martha helped the children navigate the initial passage, her calm voice providing reassurance as they moved from sunlight into the cool darkness of their underground sanctuary. The contrast was dramatic outside. The Colorado morning sparkled with golden light and crisp mountain air, while inside the cave, shadows danced in the flickering light of Samuel's oil lantern, and the temperature dropped to a constant coolness that would require blankets for comfort during extended stays. "This is actually quite remarkable," Martha observed as they emerged into the main chamber, her school teacher's curiosity overcoming her fear as she examined the natural architecture surrounding them. The chamber was roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with a ceiling that soared up into darkness beyond the reach of their lantern light. Ancient water stains on the walls showed the patterns of seasonal flooding, while dry areas near the entrance provided perfect sleeping and storage spaces. Samuel had already prepared the cave for their arrival during his earlier visits, stockpiling firewood in a natural alcove where smoke would be dispersed through hidden fissures that vented far above on the mountainside. A ring of stones marked a safe fire pit, positioned to provide maximum warmth while minimizing the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. In the enclosed space, canvas ground cloths protected against the cave's moisture, while blankets and basic cooking supplies were stored in wooden crates that could be sealed against rodents and insects. "How did you know about this place?" Rebecca asked, her practical mind immediately recognizing the extensive preparation that had gone into making the cave habitable. The question reflected the kind of analytical thinking that would serve her well as she matured into adulthood, assuming they all survived the current crisis. "Cheyenne hunting parties used this cave system for winter shelter," Samuel explained, lighting a small fire that immediately made the chamber feel more welcoming and less like a tomb. "My mother's people taught me to read the landscape for places like this, natural fortifications that provide protection without requiring human construction that enemies can spot from a distance." The twins Daniel and David immediately began exploring the chamber's perimeter, their shared curiosity overcoming the fear that had marked their earlier behavior. They discovered additional passages leading deeper into the mountain, along with evidence of previous human habitation in the form of ancient fire rings and pictographs painted on the cave walls by Native American artists, whose names had been lost to history. "Look at these drawings," David called softly, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space as he examined figures of hunters and animals painted in red ochre and charcoal. "They're like the pictures in our history books, but these are real." Samuel joined the boys near the pictographs, his knowledge of Cheyenne culture allowing him to interpret some of the symbols and figures. "These tell stories about successful hunts and safe winters," he explained, tracing one figure with his finger while being careful not to damage the ancient artwork. "Your people, my mother's people, they believed that sharing stories about survival would help future generations learn from their experiences." Sarah Chen unpacked her carefully wrapped school books and arranged them on a flat stone that could serve as a makeshift desk, her determination to continue learning even in their current circumstances reflecting the immigrant work ethic that had brought her family to America. "Will we be able to continue our lessons while we're here, Miss Whitfield?" she asked, her question revealing priorities that impressed both Martha and Samuel. "Education doesn't stop just because our classroom has changed," Martha replied with a smile that helped ease the tension all of them were feeling. "In fact, this might be the most important lesson any of you ever receive: how to survive when everything familiar is taken away, and how to find strength in each other when the world becomes dangerous." Michael O'Connor had positioned himself near the cave entrance where he could monitor the approaches. While still participating in the group's activities, his survival instincts, honed by his long journey from Kansas, told him that their safety depended on maintaining vigilance even in their hidden sanctuary. "How long before they find us?" he asked Samuel, his question reflecting practical concerns rather than panic. "They won't find us if we're careful," Samuel replied confidently. Though he appreciated the boy's tactical awareness, Crow Feather is skilled, but he thinks like a hunter rather than a soldier. He'll focus on obvious hiding places, root cellars, barns, dense brush rather than searching for concealed cave systems that require specialized knowledge to locate. Little Emma Patterson had claimed a spot near the fire, where the warmth and light provided maximum comfort for someone still struggling to cope with a world that had become unpredictable and threatening. She hugged her rag doll while watching Samuel with the intense curiosity that children often showed toward adults who represented safety in dangerous situations. "Are you going to stay with us?" she asked, her small voice carrying volumes of hope and vulnerability. The question struck Samuel more deeply than he had expected, touching on issues of abandonment and protection that resonated with his own childhood experiences of loss and displacement. "I'm going to make sure all of you are safe," he promised, though he deliberately avoided specifics about his long-term plans. His immediate responsibility was clear, but the future remained uncertain depending on how the confrontation with the Blackwood gang developed. Martha began organizing their temporary living space with the systematic efficiency of someone accustomed to creating order from chaos. She assigned sleeping areas for each child, established storage zones for their supplies, and created a schedule for cave maintenance that would keep everyone occupied, while ensuring their sanctuary remained concealed from outside detection. Her leadership helped establish a sense of normalcy that was crucial for maintaining morale. During their enforced isolation, "Mr. Rivers," Martha said quietly, drawing Samuel aside for a private conversation while the children were distracted by their exploration of the cave system, "I need to know what you're not telling us about the situation in town. These children have already lost so much, I won't have them blindsided by developments they're not prepared to handle." Samuel appreciated her directness and her protective instincts, recognizing that she deserved honest information about the dangers they faced. "The Blackwood gang doesn't leave witnesses," he said quietly, his words chosen carefully to convey seriousness without creating panic. "They'll conduct their robbery, eliminate anyone who might identify them to authorities, and disappear into the wilderness. By evening, Cedar Falls will either be a ghost town or a graveyard." The brutal honesty of his assessment hit Martha like a physical blow, but she absorbed the information without flinching, because she understood that denial would not protect the children from harsh realities. "And if they discover us here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear she was struggling to control. "Then I'll hold them off while you get the children through the back passages," Samuel replied, with the calm matter-of-factness of someone who had accepted the possibility of his own death in service of a larger cause. The cave system connects to a series of natural chimneys that emerge on the north face of the mountain, difficult climbing, but not impossible for determined people. Martha nodded her understanding, filing away the escape route information while hoping desperately that such drastic measures would not become necessary. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her question reflecting genuine curiosity about the motivations of a man who was risking his life for strangers. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire while considering how much of his personal history to reveal. "I've spent too many years running from responsibility," he finally said. "Maybe it's time to stand and fight for something that matters." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of distant explosions. Echoing through the cave entrance, the Blackwood gang had apparently decided to use dynamite to break into the bank's vault rather than relying on traditional safe-cracking techniques. The booming sounds were followed by increased gunfire, and shouting that suggested resistance from the townspeople was stronger than the gang had anticipated. "That's Tom Anderson," Samuel said, recognizing the distinctive report of the blacksmith's double-barreled shotgun among the various weapon sounds, and Doc Peterson's rifle. "They're making a fight of it." The knowledge that Cedar Falls residents were resisting rather than submitting passively to the gang's demands created a moral dilemma for Samuel that he struggled to resolve. His primary responsibility was protecting Martha and the children, but he also felt obligated to help the townspeople who were facing overwhelming odds. "Without adequate preparation or leadership, you're thinking about going back," Martha observed, her school teacher's ability to read people serving her well in understanding Samuel's internal conflict. "You think you should be down there fighting with them. 7 against 37 aren't good odds," Samuel admitted, his military training automatically calculating the tactical situation, even as his protective instincts demanded that he remain with the vulnerable civilians under his care. But sometimes a single person in the right position can change the outcome of an entire battle. Rebecca had been listening to their quiet conversation while pretending to help Emma arrange her belongings, her experiences as the eldest orphan, having taught her to pay attention to adult discussions that might affect her and her surrogate siblings. "We'll be safe here," she said quietly, her mature voice carrying surprising authority for someone so young. "You've taught us what to do if there's trouble, and Miss Whitfield will take care of us." The girl's words reflected an understanding of duty and sacrifice that impressed Samuel, while also breaking his heart. Children her age should not have to make such calculations about adult responsibilities and the price of survival. But her practical wisdom also provided him with the moral clarity he needed to make his decision about how to proceed as the battle for Cedar Falls continued to rage in the valley below their mountain sanctuary. The gunfire from Cedar Falls had intensified over the past hour, transforming from sporadic shots into sustained volleys that suggested organized resistance rather than random panic. Samuel positioned himself at the cave entrance where he could observe the town through his field glasses, while remaining concealed behind the natural rock formations that guarded their sanctuary. What he saw through the magnified lenses confirmed his worst fears about the battle developing below. The Blackwood gang had encountered unexpected opposition from townspeople who refused to submit quietly to robbery and murder. Tom Anderson's blacksmith shop had become an impromptu fortress, with the massive anvil providing cover while Anderson and 3 other men maintained defensive fire against gang members attempting to flank the bank. Doc Peterson had barricaded himself in his medical office with his hunting rifle, using his elevated position to harass raiders trying to organize coordinated attacks on the civilian defenders. But Samuel's military experience told him that courage alone would not be enough to overcome the gang's superior numbers and firepower. The townspeople were fighting with the desperate bravery of civilians protecting their homes, but they lacked the tactical coordination necessary to mount an effective defense against professional criminals who had survived similar battles. in dozens of other frontier communities. How bad is it? Martha asked quietly, joining Samuel at the cave entrance while the children remained occupied with their temporary lessons around the fire. She had noticed the tension in his shoulders and the grim expression that had replaced his earlier calm confidence. "They're making a better fight than I expected," Samuel replied honestly, lowering his field glasses while considering how much tactical detail to share. "But they're scattered across too wide an area to support each other effectively. The gang will eventually coordinate their attacks to isolate each defensive position and eliminate resistance systematically." Martha absorbed this information with the practical wisdom of someone who understood that wishful thinking would not change harsh realities. "And if you went down there?" she asked, her question reflecting both genuine curiosity and growing dread about Samuel's internal struggle. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, mentally calculating the tactical possibilities while wrestling with competing moral obligations that seemed impossible to reconcile. "I might be able to organize their defense more effectively," he finally admitted. "Military training teaches you how to coordinate scattered forces into mutually supporting positions. But leaving you and the children alone up here would be abandoning your primary responsibility," Martha finished, her voice carrying no judgment, but rather the kind of clear-eyed assessment that came from years of making difficult decisions about other people's welfare. "Those children have already lost everyone they loved. They can't lose you too." The weight of her words settled on Samuel like a physical burden, reminding him that his choices would affect 7 innocent lives rather than just his own conscience. But the sound of renewed explosions from the town below made it clear that time was running out for Cedar Falls defenders, and Samuel's specialized knowledge might represent their only hope for survival. Rebecca Thompson had been listening to their conversation while pretending to help the twins with their arithmetic lessons, her experiences as an orphan having taught her to monitor adult discussions that might affect her family's safety. Now she approached Samuel and Martha with the kind of serious expression that made her seem far older than her 12 years. "Mr. Rivers," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to make adult decisions at a child's age. "We all heard what you told Miss Whitfield about the escape routes through the back of the cave. If something happens to you down there, we can take care of ourselves long enough to get away." Samuel knelt down to Rebecca's eye level, recognizing the courage it had taken for her to volunteer her siblings for increased danger in order to free him for action. "Rebecca, that's not a decision children should have to make," he said gently, his respect for her maturity tempered by grief over the circumstances that had forced such premature responsibility upon her. "We stopped being regular children when our parents died," Rebecca replied with the matter-of-fact acceptance that characterized survivors who had learned to cope with loss. "We know how to hide, how to stay quiet, and how to run if we have to. Miss Whitfield will keep us together. And you taught us the way out if the bad men find this place." The girls' words were echoed by nods from the other children, who had apparently discussed the situation among themselves and reached a consensus about their protector's moral dilemma. Even little Emma seemed to understand that Samuel faced a choice between their immediate safety and his obligation to help others who were fighting for their lives. "The town people need someone who knows about fighting," Daniel said, speaking for himself and his twin brother with their characteristic directness. "We need someone who cares about us to come back alive. So you have to go help them win quickly and then come home to us." Samuel felt something shift inside his chest at Daniel's use of the word home to describe their temporary cave sanctuary. These children had claimed him as family with the same unconscious certainty that they had accepted Martha's protection, creating bonds of affection and responsibility that transcended blood relationships or legal obligations. Martha placed her hand on Samuel's shoulder, her touch conveying support rather than pressure as she recognized the difficulty of his position. "Whatever you decide, we'll manage," she said simply. "But if you don't try to help those people, and they die because of it, you'll carry that guilt for the rest of your life." Her insight into his character was uncomfortably accurate. Samuel had spent the past 2 years running from the guilt over his participation in military actions that had harmed innocent people. and the prospect of allowing more innocents to die through inaction was equally unbearable. The difference was that this time he could choose to act in defense of the defenseless, rather than as an instrument of institutional violence. "If I go," Samuel said slowly, working through the tactical implications even as he spoke, "I'll need to move fast and strike where it will do the most damage to their organization. Take out their leadership, disrupt their coordination, create enough chaos to give the townspeople a chance to organize effective resistance." Sarah Chen looked up from her makeshift study area where she had been practicing her penmanship. "Despite their extraordinary circumstances, will you kill them?" she asked, her question reflecting the immigrant community's complex relationship with violence, understanding its necessity while maintaining moral concerns about its application. Samuel appreciated her directness and the trust it implied in his judgment about such serious matters. "I'll do whatever is necessary to stop them from hurting innocent people," he replied carefully. "Sometimes that means killing, sometimes it means finding other ways to eliminate threats. A good soldier knows the difference." Michael O'Connor had been maintaining his watch near the cave entrance, his survival instincts keeping him alert to potential dangers even during their group discussion. "How will we know if you're successful?" he asked, his practical question reflecting lessons learned during his long journey from Kansas about the importance of communication during crisis situations. "If the shooting stops and stays stopped, that means we won," Samuel explained. "If it continues past sunset, that means the gang is conducting systematic searches for survivors, and you'll need to use the back passages to escape immediately." Martha began organizing the children's emergency packs while Samuel checked his weapons and equipment for the dangerous mission ahead. His Winchester rifle held 15 rounds, supplemented by additional ammunition that would allow sustained fire during an extended engagement. His Colt revolver provided backup firepower, while his knife served both as weapon and tool for the kind of close-quarters fighting that might be necessary if he managed to infiltrate the gang's positions. "There's something else," Samuel said quietly, his words directed primarily toward Martha as the children's primary protector. "If I don't come back, wait until tomorrow afternoon before attempting to leave the cave. That will give you time to determine whether the gang has moved on or established a permanent presence in the area." Emma Patterson approached Samuel with her characteristic shyness, clutching her rag doll while looking up at him with wide eyes that held more understanding than a 6-year-old should possess. "You will come back," she said with the absolute certainty that children sometimes displayed about outcomes that adults recognized as uncertain. "You promised." Samuel knelt down and gently touched Emma's cheek, his heart breaking at the faith she placed in promises that he might not be able to keep. "I'll do everything I can to keep that promise," he said softly, making a commitment that transformed his dangerous mission from a tactical operation into a sacred obligation. The distant sound of screaming from Cedar Falls made further discussion impossible. The gang had apparently succeeded in breaching one of the defensive positions, and civilian casualties were mounting with each passing minute. Samuel shouldered his rifle and moved toward the cave entrance, pausing only to look back at the 7 people who had become his family in the space of a few hours. "Stay together, stay quiet, and trust each other," he said, his final words carrying the weight of someone who might be saying goodbye forever. "I'll be back before dark if it's humanly possible." Martha gathered the children around her as Samuel disappeared into the pine forest, his moccasined feet carrying him silently down the mountainside toward a battle that would determine the fate of everyone he had learned to care about. Behind him, the cave sanctuary held 7 lives whose safety depended on his ability to fight with both the tactical skill of a professional soldier and the desperate determination of a man protecting his family. The real war was about to begin, and Samuel Rivers was finally ready to discover what he was truly capable of. When everything that mattered hung in the balance, Samuel moved through the pine forest with the fluid silence of a hunting wolf, his Cheyenne training allowing him to navigate the steep terrain without disturbing so much as a fallen leaf. The sounds of battle grew louder as he approached Cedar Falls, but his practiced ear could distinguish between different types of gunfire and what they revealed about the tactical situation developing below. The sharp crack of rifle fire came from multiple positions, suggesting that the townspeople had managed to establish several defensive strongpoints, while the deeper boom of shotguns indicated close quarters fighting in the streets. Most concerning was the intermittent sound of military-style coordinated volleys, evidence that Ezra Blackwood was applying his Confederate cavalry experience to organize systematic assaults on civilian positions. The gang leader understood that his numerical advantage meant nothing if his men attacked piecemeal and allowed defenders to defeat them one at a time. Professional coordination would eventually overwhelm amateur courage, no matter how determined. The resistance. Samuel reached his predetermined observation position on a rocky outcropping that provided clear sight lines across the entire town while remaining concealed from detection by combatants focused on their immediate surroundings. Through his field glasses, he could assess the tactical situation with the dispassionate analysis of a military professional, studying terrain for strategic advantage. The bank robbery had been completed successfully. Several gang members were loading heavy saddlebags with gold coins, while others maintained defensive positions around the building. But the operation had taken longer than planned due to civilian resistance, creating opportunities for territorial authorities to respond. If anyone had managed to escape and raise an alarm, Blackwood's timeline was now compressed, forcing him to eliminate opposition quickly rather than conducting the methodical slaughter he typically preferred. Tom Anderson's blacksmith shop had become the primary focal point of resistance, with the massive man using his double-barreled shotgun to devastating effect against gang members attempting to approach his position. The shop's location at the intersection of Main Street and Cedar Avenue provided excellent fields of fire, while the thick stone walls offered protection against rifle bullets. But Anderson was surrounded by 6 gang members who were systematically destroying his cover with concentrated fire, while others maneuvered to attack from his blind spots. Doc Peterson remained barricaded in his medical office, his elevated position allowing him to harass gang members throughout the town center. The elderly physician's marksmanship was excellent despite his age, and his knowledge of human anatomy meant that his wounds were typically fatal, rather than merely disabling. But Peterson was running low on ammunition, and his isolated position made resupply impossible without exposing himself to concentrated enemy fire. 3 other townspeople had established defensive positions in various buildings along Main Street, but their lack of military training showed in their poor tactical coordination and wasteful ammunition expenditure. They were fighting with the desperate courage of civilians protecting their homes, but courage alone would not overcome the gang's superior numbers and professional leadership. Samuel identified the key to breaking the deadlock: Ezra Blackwood himself, who had positioned himself in the abandoned livery stable where he could observe the entire battlefield while directing his men's attacks through hand signals and shouted commands. Eliminating the gang's leadership would create confusion and panic among subordinates, who were accustomed to following orders rather than making independent tactical decisions. The approach to the livery stable required crossing to 100 yards of open ground while remaining invisible to multiple hostile observers. Samuel's military experience had taught him that successful infiltration depended on patience, timing, and understanding enemy psychology. Gang members were focused on their assigned targets and would be unlikely to notice movement that occurred during periods of intense gunfire when their attention was concentrated elsewhere. Samuel waited for the next coordinated assault on Anderson's position, then used the covering noise to sprint across the first open space toward a pile of lumber that would provide temporary concealment. His movement was perfectly timed with a thunderous exchange of gunfire that masked any sound his boots might have made against the hard-packed earth. The lumber pile offered protection from observation while allowing him to study the approaches to his ultimate target. The livery stable's rear entrance was guarded by 2 gang members whose attention was focused on watching for townspeople attempting to escape, rather than detecting infiltrators moving in from the wilderness. Samuel observed their patrol pattern for several minutes, noting that they moved in predictable cycles that created brief windows of opportunity for someone skilled enough to exploit them. When the guards reached the farthest point of their patrol route, Samuel moved again with explosive speed that carried him across 30 yards of open ground to the shelter of an overturned wagon. The abandoned vehicle provided excellent concealment, while positioning him within striking distance of the stable's rear wall. Now came the most dangerous part of his infiltration, crossing the final 20 feet of open space, without being detected by guards who would undoubtedly sound an alarm if they spotted movement. Samuel drew his knife and prepared for the kind of silent killing that had been part of his military training, but which he had hoped never to use again. The guards were criminals who had participated in the murder of innocent civilians, but taking their lives in cold blood still violated moral principles that had been instilled during his childhood by parents who value human life regardless of circumstances. The first guard died without ever knowing he was in danger. Samuel's blade found the precise angle between ribs that would reach his heart instantly, preventing any outcry that might alert other gang members. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner's body falling, but Samuel's hand was already covering his mouth while the knife completed its deadly work. With professional efficiency, Samuel dragged both bodies into the stable's tack room, where they would not be discovered unless someone conducted a systematic search. The killings had been necessary to protect innocent lives, but they reminded him of skills he had hoped to leave buried with his military career. War had a way of following soldiers long after they believed they had escaped its influence. The stable's interior was exactly what Samuel had expected: a large open space with hay bales and horse stalls providing both cover and concealment for someone attempting to approach Blackwood's command position undetected. The gang leader had positioned himself in the hayloft where he could observe the battlefield through gaps in the barn siding while remaining protected from rifle fire. More importantly, his elevated position made him vulnerable to attack from below by someone skilled enough to reach him without triggering an alarm. Samuel climbed toward the hayloft using hand and footholds that years of barn work had worn into the wooden support beams. His ascent was silent and methodical, each movement calculated to avoid creating sounds that might alert his target to approaching danger. The hay bales provided excellent cover while he maneuvered into position for what would need to be a perfect shot. Blackwood was too dangerous to allow any opportunity for retaliation or escape. Through gaps in the hay bales, Samuel could observe Blackwood directing his men's attacks with the calm professionalism of an experienced military commander. The gang leader was studying the town through field glasses, while occasionally issuing orders to subordinates who relayed his commands to assault teams throughout Cedar Falls. His tactical competence was evident in the systematic way he was reducing civilian resistance through coordinated attacks that prevented defenders from supporting each other. "Morrison, take your team around Anderson's left flank while Carter's boys provide covering fire," Blackwood called down to his second-in-command. "Once you've got position, hit him from 3 directions simultaneously. He can't cover all his approaches with just one shotgun." Samuel raised his Winchester and centered the sights on Blackwood's chest, his finger taking up slack on the trigger while he calculated wind and distance factors that would affect bullet trajectory. At 50 yards, the shot was well within his capabilities, but a miss would alert the entire gang to his presence and eliminate any possibility of surprise attacks on their remaining leadership. The rifle crack echoed through the stable like thunder, and Ezra Blackwood pitched forward from the hayloft to crash onto the stable floor with a bone-breaking impact that ended his criminal career permanently. Samuel was already moving toward his secondary target, Jake Morrison, who was attempting to rally the gang members under his command. Despite the shock of losing their leader, Morrison had taken cover behind a water trough in the stable's center, his revolver drawn as he searched for the source of the shot that had killed Blackwood. "Find him," Morrison shouted to gang members who were streaming into the stable from their positions throughout the town. "Somebody got close enough to kill Ezra. Check every corner, every shadow." Samuel had anticipated this response and positioned himself accordingly. From his concealment behind stacked grain sacks, he had clear shots at multiple targets while remaining invisible to enemies who were focused on searching obvious hiding places. His second shot dropped Morrison before the gang's new leader could organize an effective search, leaving the remaining criminals without experienced tactical leadership. The psychological impact of losing both their commanders within seconds created exactly the kind of panic that Samuel had hoped to achieve. Gang members who had been confidently executing coordinated attacks suddenly found themselves leaderless and confused, uncertain whether to continue fighting or flee before additional snipers could eliminate them. The carefully planned assault on Cedar Falls began collapsing into chaos as individual criminals made independent decisions about their personal survival. Samuel used this confusion to eliminate 3 more gang members who were attempting to reorganize resistance inside the stable. His military training had taught him that successful raids depended on maintaining momentum. Allowing enemies time to recover from initial shock would give them opportunities to regroup and mount effective counterattacks. The sound of renewed gunfire from the town center indicated that the civilian defenders had recognized their opportunity and were pressing their advantage against demoralized opponents. Tom Anderson's shotgun boomed repeatedly as he advanced from his defensive position to attack gang members who had been flanking his shop just minutes earlier. Doc Peterson's rifle cracked steadily from his medical office as he picked off criminals who were attempting to retreat toward their horses. Samuel emerged from the stable to find Cedar Falls transformed from a battlefield into a scene of civilian victory. The Blackwood Gang's survivors were fleeing in all directions, some on horseback but many on foot as they abandoned equipment and wounded comrades in their panic to escape. The townspeople pursued them with the righteous fury of citizens who had successfully defended their homes against criminal invasion. But Samuel's thoughts were already turning toward the cave sanctuary, where Martha and 6 children waited for news of his survival. The battle for Cedar Falls had been won, but his personal war was just beginning as he prepared to return to the family he had claimed, and who had claimed him in return. The climb back up the mountainside seemed longer than Samuel's descent waited, as it was with the knowledge of what he had done and the questions that would inevitably follow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pine forest as he made his way toward the cave sanctuary, his mind processing not just the tactical success of his mission, but the deeper implications of his return to the kind of violence he had hoped to leave behind forever. Cedar Falls was secure. The surviving gang members had scattered like leaves before a windstorm, abandoning their wounded and their plans in their desperation to escape the town that had become their graveyard. Tom Anderson had taken charge of organizing pursuit parties, while Doc Peterson tended to the few civilian casualties. The bank's gold remained safe. The community's defenders had proven their courage, and the Blackwood Gang's reign of terror had ended with their leader's death in the livery stable loft. But Samuel carried with him more than just news of victory. Hidden in his shirt pocket was a leather wallet he had taken from Ezra Blackwood's body, not for the money it contained, but for the documents that had caught his attention during his hasty search of the dead gang leader. Among the wanted posters and crude maps, Samuel had found something that changed everything he thought he knew about his own past and his connection to the children waiting in the cave above. The wallet contained a faded daguerreotype of a young woman holding an infant, along with a letter written in feminine handwriting that bore the signature, "Your loving wife, Catherine Rivers Patterson." The woman in the photograph looked hauntingly familiar, her features echoing those Samuel saw every morning in his shaving mirror. But it was the letter's contents that had struck him like a physical blow, revealing secrets that had been buried for 7 years. "My dearest Patrick," the letter began, "I pray this finds you safe wherever your wandering has taken you. Our little Emma grows more beautiful each day, and she asks constantly about her papa who had to go away. I tell her stories about your kindness and your strength, hoping that someday you will return to us as you promised. The frontier life is harder than we expected, but we are managing with the help of good neighbors. Please come home to us soon. All my love, Catherine." The letter was dated 3 years earlier, and attached to it was a small pencil drawing obviously made by a child's hand, a stick figure. Family labeled Mama, Papa, and Emma in uneven letters. Samuel's hands had shaken as he realized the implications of what he had discovered. Emma Patterson, the 6-year-old girl currently waiting in the cave sanctuary with 5 other orphans, was not just another child he had sworn to protect. She was his daughter, The revelation explains so many things that had puzzled Samuel during his brief interactions with the children. Emma's instinctive trust in him, despite her general shyness around strangers, the familiar cast to her features that he had attributed to coincidence, her absolute certainty that he would return from his dangerous mission, the kind of faith that children often reserved for parents they had never stopped hoping to see again. Samuel paused at a stream crossing to wash the blood from his hands and to gather his thoughts before facing the most difficult conversation of his life. How did a man tell a child that he was the father who had abandoned her 3 years earlier? How did he explain that he had been living as a hermit just 50 miles away, while she and her mother struggled to survive on the harsh frontier? Most importantly, how did he justify his absence during the tragedy that had left Emma orphaned and traumatized? The answers lay buried in his own painful history, the incident at Sand Creek that had shattered his faith in military service and sent him fleeing into the wilderness to escape the guilt of what he had participated in. He had told Catherine that he was leaving for a brief scouting assignment, but the truth was that he had been running from the demons that haunted his dreams and the shame of having guided soldiers to a massacre of innocent Cheyenne families that included women and children. Samuel had convinced himself that Catherine and Emma would be better off without him, that his presence would only bring danger and sorrow to people he loved. He had sent money when he could, delivered anonymously through merchants who traded throughout the territory, but he had never returned to the small cabin where his wife and daughter waited for promises he felt too broken to keep. Now Catherine was dead, killed by a grizzly bear while checking trap lines to provide for their daughter. Emma had survived because she had been sick that day and stayed home, only to wake up to a nightmare of solitude and loss that no 6-year-old should ever experience. The neighbors had cared for her temporarily before arrangements were made to send her to Cedar Falls, where Martha Whitfield's informal orphanage had become her salvation. The cave entrance appeared ahead through the trees, and Samuel could see the glow of firelight from within, suggesting that Martha was maintaining their temporary home with her characteristic efficiency. The sound of children's voices reached him through the evening air, Rebecca helping the twins with their reading, Sarah practicing her penmanship, Michael organizing their supply cache, and Emma's softer voice asking questions that Martha answered. With patient kindness, Samuel paused outside the cave entrance to compose himself, knowing that his expression would reveal too much to Martha's perceptive eyes if he wasn't careful. The children had already endured enough trauma and confusion. They didn't need to see their protector struggling with emotional revelations that complicated an already difficult situation. Samuel entered the cave to find 7 faces turned toward him with expressions of relief, curiosity, and hope. The children had clearly been maintaining their lessons and activities as instructed, but the strain of waiting for news showed in their posture and the way they immediately gathered around him for reassurance about the outside world. "It's over," Samuel announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a mission accomplished despite the personal turmoil he was struggling to conceal. "The gang is finished, their leaders are dead, and the survivors have scattered. Cedar Falls is safe." The celebration that followed was subdued but heartfelt, with Martha organizing a special dinner from their emergency supplies, while the children peppered Samuel with questions about the battle and its aftermath. He answered their inquiries with carefully edited accounts that satisfied their curiosity, without exposing them to details about the violence he had been forced to employ. Rebecca proved particularly astute in her questioning, her experiences as an orphan having taught her to read between the lines of adult explanations. "Will we be able to go back to the schoolhouse tomorrow?" she asked, her practical mind already moving beyond the immediate crisis to consider their long-term situation. "The building is undamaged," Samuel confirmed, grateful for questions that focused on practical matters rather than emotional complexities. "But there will be a lot of cleanup and reorganization needed. The town will probably want to hire a sheriff and establish better defenses against future threats." Emma had positioned herself close to Samuel throughout the evening, her small hand frequently reaching out to touch his arm as if to confirm that he was really there and unharmed. Her behavior suggested an instinctive recognition that went beyond the gratitude The other children showed toward their protector. Samuel found himself studying her features in the firelight, seeing echoes of Catherine's gentle nature combined with his own stubborn determination. "Mr. Rivers," Emma said quietly as the other children prepared for sleep, "will you stay with us now? I mean, will you live in Cedar Falls and help Miss Whitfield take care of us?" The question struck at the heart of Samuel's dilemma about how to handle his newfound knowledge of their relationship. Emma was asking for exactly what he wanted most: the opportunity to be a father to the daughter he had unknowingly abandoned. But she was asking as an orphan seeking stability rather than as a child who had found her missing parent. "I think I'd like that very much," Samuel replied carefully, his words carrying more emotional weight than Emma could possibly understand. "Cedar Falls seems like a good place to settle down and build something permanent." Martha had been observing this exchange with the sharp awareness of someone trained to notice the subtle dynamics between children and adults. Something in Samuel's tone and body language suggested depths of feeling that went beyond a normal adult concern for orphan children. She filed away her observations for later consideration, recognizing that emotional revelations often followed traumatic events and required careful handling. As the children settled into their sleeping areas around the fire, Samuel found himself alone with thoughts that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. The wallet in his pocket contained not just evidence of his connection to Emma, but also clues about Catherine's final years and the struggles she had faced, while he lived in self-imposed exile, just days away from where she needed him most. The moral weight of his choices pressed down on him like a physical burden. He had spent 3 years running from guilt over his participation in military violence, only to discover that his flight had condemned his own family to hardship and ultimate tragedy. Catherine had died alone, facing dangers that he could easily have helped her navigate if he had possessed the courage to return home and face his responsibilities as a husband and father. But perhaps redemption was still possible. Emma was alive and apparently thriving under Martha's care, surrounded by other children who had become her family and protectors who genuinely cared about her welfare. Samuel had the opportunity to be part of that family without disrupting the stability that had been so carefully constructed from the ruins of multiple tragedies. The question was whether he had the right to claim his daughter without revealing the truth about his identity, and whether Emma deserved to know that her long-lost father had finally come home. Dawn broke over Cedar Falls with an eerie silence that spoke of fundamental change, the kind of quiet that follows violent storms and leaves survivors wondering if the calm is permanent or merely the pause before another tempest. Samuel had spent the night alternating between fitful sleep and long periods of staring into the dying embers of their cave fire, wrestling with decisions that would affect not just his own future, but the fragile stability that Martha had built. For 6 traumatized children, the leather wallet lay beside his bedroll like an accusation, its contents representing both the answer to prayers he had been afraid to voice and the weight of responsibilities he had spent 3 years avoiding. Each time Samuel closed his eyes, he saw Catherine's face as it had appeared in that final daguerreotype, older than when he had left her, marked by hardships he should have helped her bear, but still carrying the gentle strength that had first attracted him to a woman who deserved far better than abandonment by a broken soldier. Martha woke before the children, her teacher's instincts attuned to the rhythms of her charges even in their temporary wilderness sanctuary. She found Samuel sitting near the cave entrance, his profile silhouetted against the morning light as he stared down at the town, where smoke still rose from scattered fires that marked the previous day's battle. "You didn't sleep," Martha observed quietly, settling beside him with the comfortable familiarity that had developed between 2 adults sharing responsibility for others' welfare. Her voice carried no judgment, only the kind of practical concern that came from experience with people processing traumatic events. "Too much to think about," Samuel replied honestly, his words carrying layers of meaning that he wasn't yet ready to fully explain. "The battle's over, but the consequences are just beginning. Cedar Falls will need time to heal, and there will be questions about what happened to the gang and who was responsible for stopping them." Martha studied his profile in the growing light, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands occasionally touched the pocket where he had been keeping something throughout the night. Her years of working with children had taught her to recognize when people were struggling with secrets that needed sharing, but also when to wait for them to find their own courage to speak. "The territorial marshal will probably want a full report," she said, providing him with a safe topic while leaving space for whatever deeper concerns were troubling him. "Tom Anderson and Doc Peterson can testify about the gang's attack and the defense the townspeople mounted, but they'll want to know about the mysterious marksman who eliminated the gang's leadership." Samuel nodded grimly, having anticipated this complication during his sleepless night. His intervention had been necessary to save innocent lives, but it would inevitably raise questions about his identity, his capabilities, and his reasons for being in the area at the precise moment when help was needed most. Territorial authorities tended to be suspicious of convenient coincidences, especially when they involved military-grade combat skills applied by civilians with unclear backgrounds. "There's something else," Samuel said quietly, his decision crystallizing as he realized that Martha deserved to know the truth before anyone else. She had earned his trust through her selfless dedication to the children's welfare, and her wisdom would be essential for navigating the emotional complexities that lay ahead. Samuel withdrew the leather wallet from his pocket and handed it to Martha without explanation, watching her face as she examined its contents with the careful attention she normally reserved for evaluating her students' work. He saw the moment when recognition dawned, her eyes widening as she studied the daguerreotype, and then reading the letter with growing understanding of its implications. "Emma's father," Martha whispered, her voice carrying amazement rather than accusation as she looked from the photograph to Samuel's face and back again. "You're Patrick Rivers. She's been waiting for you." The confirmation of his identity felt like a physical weight lifting from Samuel's shoulders, even as it was replaced by the heavier burden of explaining 3 years of absence and abandonment. "I left them after Sand Creek," he said quietly, his words carrying the shame of someone confessing to moral failure. "Told Catherine I was going on a scouting mission, but the truth was I was running from what I'd done, what I'd seen, what I'd helped make possible." Martha absorbed this revelation with the same calm practicality she brought to all crises, her mind immediately moving from shock to consideration of how this knowledge would affect the children's welfare. "She never stopped believing you would come back," she said softly, her words based on conversations with Emma during quiet moments when the little girl had shared fragments of memories about her missing father. "Catherine's dead because I wasn't there to protect her," Samuel continued, his voice rough with grief and self-recrimination. "She died alone, facing dangers I could have prevented, while I lived like a hermit 50 miles away feeling sorry for myself. Emma became an orphan because her father was too much of a coward to come home and face his responsibilities." The brutal honesty of his self-assessment struck Martha as both accurate and ultimately irrelevant to their current situation. She had seen enough tragedy in her years of teaching to know that guilt was often less important than learning from past mistakes and choosing better actions going forward. "What matters now is what you do next," Martha said firmly, her tone carrying the same authority she used when helping students work through difficult problems. "Emma has found her father again, even if she doesn't know it yet. The question is whether you're ready to be the parent she needs, not the one you think you should have been 3 years ago." Behind them in the cave, the children were beginning to stir with the natural rhythms of young people awakening to a new day. Rebecca's voice could be heard organizing the morning routine with her characteristic efficiency, while the twins discussed plans for exploring more of the cave system once it was safe to move around freely. Sarah was already arranging her school books for continued lessons, and Michael was checking their supply cache with the systematic thoroughness that marked his approach to survival preparations. Emma's voice cut through the other conversations with a question that struck Samuel like a physical blow. "Miss Whitfield, is Mr. Rivers still here? I dreamed that he had to go away again." Martha squeezed Samuel's hand gently before rising to reassure Emma that their protector remained with them, but her touch carried a message about courage and the importance of seizing opportunities. for redemption before they disappeared forever. Samuel watched as Martha knelt beside Emma's sleeping area, smoothing the child's blonde hair while providing the reassurance that would start another day of carefully constructed normalcy. "Mr. Rivers is right outside, sweetheart," Martha said softly. "He's keeping watch to make sure we're all safe. Would you like to help me prepare breakfast for everyone?" Samuel observed this interaction with new eyes, seeing not just a dedicated teacher caring for her students, but a woman who had become Emma's surrogate mother during the months when his daughter needed stability and love more than anything else in the world. Martha had provided everything that Samuel had failed to give: safety, education, family, and the kind of consistent presence that allowed damaged children to heal from trauma. The recognition of Martha's role in Emma's life created new complications for Samuel's desire to reclaim his daughter. Emma had bonded with Martha as a mother figure and with the other orphans as siblings, creating a family structure that met her emotional needs in ways that might be disrupted by revelations about her biological father. Samuel's return to her life needed to enhance rather than threaten the stability she had found. As the children emerged from the cave for their morning routines, Samuel found himself studying each of them with new understanding of the family dynamics that had developed during their months together. Rebecca had assumed the role of eldest sister and protective leader, while the twins provided each other with the kind of mutual support that helped them process their shared trauma. Sarah had found acceptance and belonging despite cultural differences, while Michael had learned to trust again despite his initial wariness of adult promises. Emma moved among this chosen family with the confidence of someone who knew her place and felt secure in her relationships. But Samuel noticed how her eyes sought him out repeatedly during the morning activities. She brought him a cup of coffee that Martha had prepared, lingering near his side longer than was strictly necessary, and finding excuses to engage him in conversation about topics that seemed important to a 6-year-old mind. "Mr. Rivers," Emma said as she helped him organize his equipment, "do you think my papa will ever come home? Mama used to say he would, but she's been gone for a long time now." The question was asked with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often displayed about loss, but it carried enough hope to break Samuel's heart. Emma was not asking as someone who had given up on seeing her father again, but rather as a child who still believed in the possibility of family reunification. Despite evidence that suggested otherwise, Samuel knelt down to Emma's eye level, looking into eyes that mirrored his own while searching for words that would begin the process of revealing truth without shattering the trust she had placed in him as her protector. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "fathers have to travel very far away to learn how to be better men before they can come home to their families, but when they do come back, they love their children even more than before." Emma considered this explanation with the serious attention she gave to all adult attempts to help her understand the complexities of grown-up behavior. "Do you think he learned enough yet?" she asked, her question carrying the weight of someone who had been waiting for promises to be fulfilled. "I think he's learned some very important lessons," Samuel replied, his voice thick with emotion as he realized that this conversation was leading toward the moment when he would need to find the courage to tell his daughter who he really was. "And I think he would be very proud of how brave and smart and kind his little girl has become." While he was away, the morning sun climbed higher above the Colorado peaks as Cedar Falls began the process of rebuilding from the previous day's violence. But in the cave sanctuary above the town, a father and daughter were beginning their own careful journey toward reunion and redemption that would test everything both of them had learned about love, forgiveness, and the meaning of family. The return to Cedar Falls felt like entering a different world than the one they had fled the previous morning, where yesterday had brought the sounds of gunfire and screaming. Today offered the purposeful noise of a community rebuilding itself. After surviving an existential threat, hammers rang against nails as merchants repaired damaged storefronts, while groups of men worked to clear debris from the main street and restore normal operations to businesses that had been transformed into impromptu fortresses. Samuel led Martha and the children down from their mountain sanctuary with the measured pace of someone who understood that homecomings could be as traumatic as departures, depending on what people found when they returned to familiar places. The children walked in their established protective formation, Rebecca keeping the group together, the twins flanking the younger ones, Sarah maintaining her quiet watchfulness, Michael carrying emergency supplies, and Emma staying close to Samuel with the instinctive trust that had characterized her behavior since his arrival. Tom Anderson emerged from his blacksmith shop as the group approached the town center, his massive frame bearing several bandages from the previous days, fighting but his expression carrying the satisfaction of a man who had defended his home successfully. He recognized Samuel immediately despite having only glimpsed him during the battle, his experienced eye noting the military bearing and professional competence that marked someone trained for exactly the kind of violence that had saved Cedar Falls. "You must be the guardian angel Doc Peterson mentioned," Anderson said, extending a hand that bore fresh cuts from handling weapons under combat conditions. "Tom Anderson, though I suppose you already know that from watching the fight develop yesterday." Samuel accepted the handshake while mentally calculating how much of his involvement should be acknowledged publicly versus how much should remain confidential to avoid unwanted attention from territorial authorities. "Samuel Rivers," he replied simply. "I was in the area when the shooting started and decided to lend a hand where I could." Anderson's knowing smile suggested that he understood the necessity of understated explanations when discussing matters that might interest federal marshals or military investigators. "Well, your lending a hand saved a lot of lives yesterday." Blackwood's boys scattered like quail once their leadership got eliminated. "Haven't seen hide nor hair of them since." Martha stepped forward to redirect the conversation toward more immediate concerns about the children's welfare and their return to normal routines. "How is the schoolhouse, Mr. Anderson? Were any of the buildings damaged during the fighting?" "Schoolhouse is fine," Anderson assured her, his tone gentling as he addressed the woman who had become the unofficial mother to Cedar Falls' most vulnerable residents. "Gang never got that far east before things went sideways on them. Your place is exactly like you left it, ready for lessons to resume whenever you think the children are ready." Emma tugged on Samuel's sleeve to get his attention, her small face looking up at him with an expression that combined hope with carefully controlled anxiety. "Will you come see our school, Mr. Rivers? Miss Whitfield could show you where we have our lessons and where we sleep upstairs." The invitation was extended with the unconscious authority of a child who had already decided that Samuel belonged in their lives permanently, but it also carried undertones of testing. Emma was seeking confirmation that their protector would remain part of their daily world rather than disappearing like so many adults in her young life. "I'd like that very much," Samuel replied, his words carrying more emotional weight than Emma could possibly understand. The prospect of seeing the place where his daughter had been living and learning for the past months felt like both a privilege and a form of judgment on his failure to provide the stability she had found elsewhere. The walk to the schoolhouse took them past buildings that bore scars from the previous day's violence, bullet holes in wooden walls, broken windows awaiting replacement, and bloodstains on wooden sidewalks that would serve as permanent reminders of how close Cedar Falls had come to complete destruction. But Samuel also noticed signs of the community's resilience and determination to move forward, rather than dwelling on trauma. Doc Peterson waved from his medical office, where he was treating wounded gang members who had been too severely injured to flee with their surviving comrades. The elderly physician's commitment to treating all patients regardless of their moral character reflected the kind of principled behavior that had made frontier communities like Cedar Falls havens for people seeking fresh starts and second chances. "Doc's been asking about you," Anderson mentioned as they passed the medical office. "Wants to thank you properly for what you did yesterday. And I suspect he's got some questions about your background that go beyond mere curiosity." Samuel nodded, his understanding while hoping that Doc Peterson's questions would remain informal, rather than developing into the kind of official inquiry that might attract unwanted attention from territorial authorities. His military service record was a matter of public documentation, but the circumstances of his discharge and subsequent disappearance were details that he preferred to keep private. The schoolhouse appeared ahead through a grove of pine trees, its familiar log construction and hand-hewn timber giving it the appearance of a building that had grown naturally from the landscape rather than being imposed upon it by human design. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that someone had already restored the heating system and prepared the building for immediate occupancy. Mrs. Cooper and Mrs. Hanson came by this morning to air everything out and get the place ready for your return, Anderson explained, his words reflecting the kind of community support that had sustained Martha's informal orphanage since its establishment. They figured you'd want to get the children back into their normal routines as soon as possible. Emma ran ahead to open the schoolhouse door with the proprietary enthusiasm of someone returning to a beloved home after an unexpected adventure. She beckoned Samuel to follow her inside while maintaining a running commentary about the various features that made their school special compared to other buildings in Cedar Falls. "This is where we have our reading lessons," Emma explained, pointing to a circle of small chairs arranged near the fireplace. "And this is the big table where we do our arithmetic and practice our penmanship. Miss Whitfield says I'm getting much better at making my letters look right." Samuel examined Emma's schoolwork with the careful attention of someone who understood that a child's educational progress reflected not just intellectual development, but emotional healing from trauma. Her penmanship showed steady improvement over the months she had been living with Martha, while her arithmetic demonstrated the kind of logical thinking that would serve her well as she matured. More touching were the drawings that decorated the walls around Emma's designated workspace, crayon illustrations that told the story of her emotional journey from loss and confusion to growing security and hope. Early drawings showed solitary figures and dark colors that reflected her initial trauma, while more recent work featured families, bright colors, and scenes of children playing together in safe environments. "Emma is one of our most dedicated students," Martha said softly, joining Samuel as he studied their daughter's artistic progression. "She works harder than children twice her age, and she's always asking questions about everything from geography to natural science. She has her father's curiosity and her mother's gentle nature." The comment was delivered with the kind of deliberate meaning that suggested Martha was creating opportunities for Samuel to acknowledge his relationship with Emma when he felt ready to do so. Her understanding of child psychology told her that emotional revelations needed to occur naturally, rather than being forced, but she was providing openings for truth when the moment felt appropriate. Emma had moved to the ladder that led to the converted attic where the orphan children made their home, her small hands gripping the rungs as she prepared to show Samuel the sleeping arrangements that had become as familiar as family to all of them. "Come see our beds," she called down to him. "I sleep right next to Rebecca, and the boys have their area on the other side." The attic space was larger than Samuel had expected, with enough room for 6 individual sleeping areas that provided privacy, while maintaining the sense of family togetherness that helped the children feel secure. Each child had personalized their space with possessions and decorations that reflected their individual personalities while contributing to the overall atmosphere of a real home rather than a temporary shelter. Emma's area was meticulously organized, with the precision of someone who had learned that maintaining control over small things helped manage anxiety about larger uncertainties. Her few dresses hung neatly on wooden pegs, while her books and school supplies were arranged on a makeshift shelf with mathematical precision. Most prominently displayed was the rag doll that she carried everywhere, positioned where it could watch over her during sleep. But what caught Samuel's attention was a small wooden box, placed carefully beside Emma's pillow, its contents suggesting secrets that a 6-year-old considered too precious for casual display. Emma noticed his curiosity and approached the box with the reverent care that children reserve for their most treasured possessions. "These are my special things from before," Emma explained, opening the box to reveal its contents with the trust of someone sharing sacred mysteries. "Mama let me keep them when we had to leave our house." Inside the box were artifacts of the life that Samuel had abandoned 3 years earlier. A man's carved wooden button that had come from one of his shirts, a small arrowhead that he had given Emma when she was barely old enough to walk, and a folded piece of paper that bore his own handwriting from a letter he had sent during one of his early military assignments. The sight of these mementos struck Samuel with the force of a physical blow. evidence that Emma had been carrying memories of him throughout her entire ordeal of loss and displacement. She had preserved these connections to her missing father with the devotion of someone who refused to accept that important people could simply disappear forever. "Papa gave me the arrowhead," Emma said quietly, her small fingers tracing its edges with familiar reverence. "He said it would keep me safe and remind me that he was always thinking about me, even when he had to be far away." Samuel knelt beside Emma, his heart breaking at the evidence of faith that had survived despite every reason for a child to lose hope in adult promises. The moment had arrived when silence would be more harmful than truth, when love demanded the courage to risk everything for the possibility of genuine family reunion. "Emma," Samuel said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years of separation and the hope of all the years that could follow. "There's something very important I need to tell you about your papa." Emma's eyes searched Samuel's face with the intense concentration that children brought to moments they sensed would change everything they understood about their world. The wooden box remained open between them, its precious contents representing 3 years of faith that had never wavered despite every reason for a little girl to stop believing in promises that seemed impossible to keep. "What about Papa?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the careful control of someone who had learned to prepare herself for disappointment while never quite abandoning hope. Her small hands continued to hold the carved wooden button, turning it over with the unconscious reverence reserved for sacred objects. Samuel reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew an identical button, one that had come from the same shirt he had been wearing when he left Catherine and Emma 3 years earlier. He held it out so Emma could see the perfect match, same carving, same wear patterns, same small chip on one edge where it had caught on a tree branch. "During one of his scouting missions, your papa carved those buttons himself," Samuel said quietly, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "He made them from a piece of oak wood that came from the tree where he first told your mama that he loved her." Emma stared at the matching buttons with the dawning comprehension that children sometimes displayed when adult mysteries finally revealed their true meaning. Her eyes moved from the buttons to Samuel's face, studying features that she now recognized with the sudden clarity of someone seeing truth that had been hidden in plain sight. "You're him," she whispered, her words carrying amazement rather than accusation. "You're my papa who went away and learned how to be better." Samuel nodded, unable to trust his voice, as Emma launched herself into his arms with the explosive joy of someone whose deepest hopes had just been confirmed. He held his daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the solid reality of her presence. After 3 years of wondering if he would ever have the chance to hold her again. "I'm sorry I was gone so long," Samuel whispered against Emma's hair, his words carrying the weight of every night he had spent wondering about her welfare and every day he had spent convinced that she would be better off without him. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most." Emma pulled back just enough to look into her father's eyes, her small hands framing his face with the tender authority of someone offering forgiveness that had already been granted long ago. "Mama said you would come back when you were ready," she said simply. She said sometimes daddies have to go away to learn important things, but they always love their little girls even when they can't be together. The wisdom in Catherine's words struck Samuel with the force of revelation. His wife had understood his departure better than he had understood it himself, recognizing that his guilt and trauma required healing that could only occur through separation and self-discovery. She had prepared Emma for his absence while maintaining faith in his eventual return, creating a foundation of love that had sustained their daughter through the worst experiences of her young life. Martha watched this reunion from the top of the attic ladder, her eyes bright with tears as she witnessed the moment when a broken family began the process of healing itself. The other children had gathered around as well, their faces reflecting a mixture of joy for Emma and curiosity about how this revelation would affect their own relationships within their chosen family structure. "Does this mean Mr. Rivers is Emma's real papa?" Rebecca asked, her practical mind immediately moving to consider the implications for their living arrangements and daily routines. As the unofficial leader among the orphans, she felt responsible for understanding how changes in adult relationships might affect the stability they had all worked so hard to establish. It means Emma has found her father, Martha replied carefully, her words chosen to acknowledge the importance of biological relationships, while affirming the value of the bonds that had formed among all the children. But it doesn't change the fact that you're all family to each other, and that this schoolhouse is home for everyone who needs it to be. Daniel and David exchanged one of their wordless communications before Daniel spoke for both of them. "Will you stay and be our teacher too, Mr. Rivers?" he asked, his question reflecting the twins' characteristic ability to focus on practical concerns rather than emotional complexities. Emma's papa, but also someone who helps all of us learn things. Samuel looked around at the 5 other children who had become his daughter's siblings and protectors, understanding that his relationship with Emma could not be separated from his responsibility to the family structure that had saved her from despair and abandonment. These children had given Emma the love and security she needed during his absence, and they deserved his protection and guidance as much as his biological daughter did. "I'd like to stay and be part of all your lives," Samuel said, his words representing a commitment that went far beyond simple child care to encompass the kind of permanent dedication that real families required. Emma needs her papa, but she also needs her brothers and sisters, and you all need adults who will never leave you and never give up on you. Sarah Chen approached with her characteristic thoughtfulness, carrying one of her carefully maintained school books as a symbol of the educational priorities that had helped her cope with loss and displacement. "Will you teach us about tracking and survival like Indians do?" she asked, her question reflecting genuine curiosity about skills that could enhance their ability to take care of themselves. "I'll teach you everything I know about living safely in the wilderness," Samuel confirmed, recognizing that practical skills would be valuable for children who had already learned that the world could be dangerous and unpredictable. "But more importantly, I'll teach you about being strong enough to protect each other and wise enough to make good choices when nobody is watching." Michael O'Connor had been listening to these exchanges while maintaining his characteristic watchfulness at the attic window, his survival instincts still alert to potential threats even during moments of celebration. "What about the territorial marshal?" he asked, his practical question addressing concerns that adults might have overlooked. "Won't he want to ask questions about what happened to the gang?" Samuel appreciated Michael's tactical awareness and the way his question acknowledged that their current happiness existed within a larger context of legal and social realities that needed to be addressed. "I'll talk to the marshal when he arrives," Samuel replied honestly. "Tell him what he needs to know about the gang's elimination while keeping our families private. Business private." Emma had remained nestled in Samuel's arms throughout these conversations, her contentment evident in the way she relaxed against his chest while listening to discussions about their shared future. But now she looked up at him with a question that struck to the heart of every child's deepest fear about adult reliability. "You won't go away again, will you, Papa?" she asked, her words carrying the vulnerability of someone who had learned that even the most important people could disappear without warning. "Even if you get scared or sad about things that happened before." Samuel met his daughter's eyes with the steady gaze of someone making a sacred promise, understanding that his answer would shape her ability to trust in adult commitments for the rest of her life. "I will never leave you again," he said with absolute conviction. "Whatever problems come up, whatever difficult things we have to face, we'll handle them together as a family. That's what real families do." The sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention to the schoolhouse windows, where they could see a small group of riders making their way up the main street of Cedar Falls. The lead rider wore the distinctive badge of a territorial marshal, while his companions had the bearing of federal agents conducting official business in response to reports about criminal activity. "Marshal Thompson," Martha observed, recognizing the lawman who had visited Cedar Falls on several previous occasions to investigate reports of criminal activity in the surrounding territory. "He's probably here about yesterday's events." Samuel rose smoothly to his feet, settling Emma on her own while preparing to face the kind of official questioning that he had been avoiding for the past 3 years. But this time he felt no urge to flee or to conceal his identity behind false names and fabricated stories. His military service record was something to be proud of rather than ashamed of, and his actions in defending Cedar Falls represented exactly the kind of civic responsibility that territorial authorities wanted to encourage. "I'll go talk to him," Samuel announced, his tone carrying the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide and everything to protect. "Martha, would you keep the children here while I handle the official business?" "We'll be fine," Martha assured him, her words carrying trust that had been earned through shared danger and mutual respect. "Take whatever time you need to satisfy the marshal's questions." Emma tugged on Samuel's sleeve one more time before he left for his meeting with territorial authorities. "Remember you promised," she said quietly, her words expressing the most important truth in her young world. "You promised you wouldn't go away again." Samuel knelt down and kissed his daughter's forehead, tasting the salt of tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. "I remember," he said softly, "and I always keep my promises to the people I love." 6 months later, the schoolhouse in Cedar Falls had become something unprecedented in the Colorado Territory, a formal educational institution that combined traditional academic subjects with practical frontier skills, serving not just the town's resident children, but also students from surrounding communities who boarded during the school year. Samuel Rivers had been appointed as the school's assistant director and wilderness education instructor, his military background and survival expertise making him invaluable for teaching children how to thrive in the challenging environment of the frontier West. His classes in tracking, hunting, and self-defense had attracted attention from territorial education officials who recognized the value of practical skills alongside traditional academic subjects. Martha had accepted Samuel's proposal of marriage on Christmas morning, their wedding ceremony conducted in the same schoolhouse where they had first worked together to protect 6 orphaned children. The community celebration that followed had drawn people from throughout the territory, establishing Cedar Falls as a symbol of what frontier communities could achieve through cooperation and mutual support. Emma Rivers, she had insisted on using her father's surname from the moment of their reunion, had blossomed into a confident and articulate child whose artistic talents had begun attracting attention from visitors who commissioned drawings and paintings as souvenirs of their time in the Colorado Territory. Her bedroom wall was decorated with letters from her father's former military colleagues, who had been surprised and delighted to learn that Samuel had found peace and purpose in civilian life. Rebecca Thompson had been accepted into the territorial teacher training program in Denver, with plans to return to Cedar Falls after completing her education to help expand the school's capacity for serving regional students. Her natural leadership abilities and academic excellence had impressed evaluators, who recognized her potential for making significant contributions to frontier education. The twins Daniel and David Mason had discovered a shared aptitude for mechanical engineering, working with Tom Anderson in his blacksmith shop while pursuing advanced mathematics that would prepare them for eventual careers in railroad construction or mining engineering. Their complementary skills and natural teamwork made them valuable assets in a territory where large-scale construction projects required both technical knowledge and physical capability. Sarah Chen had emerged as the school's most accomplished linguist, serving as translator for Chinese immigrant families while pursuing her own studies in literature and composition. Her cultural bridge building had helped ease tensions between different ethnic communities in Cedar Falls, establishing a model for inclusive frontier societies that welcomed diversity rather than fearing it. Michael O'Connor had channeled his survival instincts into a career as a territorial scout and guide, using his knowledge of difficult terrain and dangerous conditions to help other families make successful transitions to frontier life. His work had saved numerous lives and established his reputation as one of the most reliable guides in the Colorado Territory. And little Emma, now 7 years old and growing taller every day, continued to ask questions about everything from cloud formations to animal behavior, secure in the knowledge that her papa would always be there to provide answers or help her find them herself. She no longer carried her rag doll everywhere, but it remained in a place of honor beside her, better reminder of the time when faith and hope had been her only companions. before her father came home and taught her that some promises really were kept, even when they seemed impossible. On warm evenings, Samuel would sit on the schoolhouse porch with Martha and Emma, watching the sun set over the Colorado peaks, while Emma practiced her reading by reciting stories about families who loved each other enough to overcome any obstacle. And every night before sleep, Emma would look up at her father and say the same words that had become their ritual. "Thank you for coming home, Papa. Thank you for keeping your promise." Samuel would kiss her forehead and reply with words that carried the weight of every lesson he had learned about duty, sacrifice, and the redemptive power of love. "Thank you for waiting for me, sweetheart. Thank you for never giving up." The half-blood scout who had once believed himself too broken to deserve happiness had discovered that sometimes the most important battles are won not through violence, but through the courage to love and be loved. In return, Cedar Falls had given him a second chance at family, and he intended to spend the rest of his life proving worthy of that gift. In the end, Samuel Rivers had learned that coming home was not about returning to a place, but about finding the people who made any place feel like home. And in the laughter of 6 children who had claimed him as family, he had found the peace that had eluded him through years of running from ghosts, that could only be laid to rest through forgiveness both given and received. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.